According to Tom Rainer, 6% of churches in America are effective in evangelism. Let's change the statistic.
Welcome to GoCast, a podcast designed to inspire and equip pastors and leaders to lead soul-winning churches. We have a mission to go and make disciples. This is GoCast.
Hey everyone, Happy New Year and welcome to GoCast. I'm your host, Kelly Stickle, and I'm joined by my friend and co-host, Tim Tribble. How are you doing today, Tim?
I'm well, Kelly. Thanks.
How was Christmas?
It was short-lived, but very good.
All right. That's good. All right. Well, we have a great present for everybody today. We have a conversation with Pastor Kevin Gerald of Champion Center in Seattle, Washington, and amazing pastor, amazing leader, pastor to pastors. And this conversation is about his new book, that is called Naked and Unafraid, and it's about vulnerability and the importance of vulnerability in ministry and in particular with leadership. So let me ask you a question.
Shoot.
So as a leader, do you ever wrestle with vulnerability? I mean, how to be vulnerable? I mean, vulnerability is important as a leader. We need to do that in order for people to trust us. But do you ever wrestle with how much is too much and
like how much do you let out?
Yeah, how much do you really? Yeah, how vulnerable should you be, and how far is too far?
I think I'd be a droid if I didn't struggle with this. But I think every leader goes through the phase where you end up getting in front of people and you want to inspire, but at the same time you bleed out a little bit. And I think as a leader, you wear many hats, and just knowing which hat to wear in front of which audience is really, really important.
Yeah, that's so true. And it is always this fine line about vulnerability. It seems to be a conversation that's happening all over the place.
Everywhere.
Just listen to a podcast with Pastor Stephen Furtick, and he was talking about it. I mean, you listened to that one, and there's something that stood out to you. And
so good.
Yeah, what stood out to you in that conversation?
When he talked about, showing people your scars, but communicating it from a point where that scar's already been healed, rather than it still being an open wound.
Right. So, I mean, he says, don't communicate vulnerability when it's still a wound. Wait till it's healed and it's a scar, and then you can talk about it.
Yes,
I think that is really wise and good. And this conversation today with Pastor Kevin is amazing. He's written this book about vulnerability, and he dives into it in levels that I've never thought about. And it's fascinating, but it's also fascinating for us and on GoCast because the impact that vulnerability has as a pastor, and leading a church that is soul winning, and our ability to win souls effectively in a church is really based on being open and vulnerable.
Absolutely.
People can't trust you. And if people don't see that, hey, we struggle too, they're not necessarily going to follow. So fascinating conversation. Can't wait to get to it. Here's my conversation with Pastor Kevin Gerald of Champion Center in Seattle. Well, hey, Pastor Kevin's, welcome to GoCast. So great to see you.
Thank you very much. Great to be with you today.
Awesome. So for our listeners, the three that might not know who you are, let's give a little background on you. You grew up in a ministry home. Your dad was a pastor. When did you feel the call of God on your life to become a pastor as well?
Yeah, I grew up. My dad was a pastor in St. Louis, Missouri, the Midwest, and I probably around the age of 16 or so is when I really started leaning into the calling that I felt on my life. I didn't really know what that meant completely, as most young people don't, but it was very definitive in terms of time and moments and so forth. In my bed at night, just hearing God talk to me, and those were the conversations that I ended up having with my dad.
Right.
Was a great help to me.
That's really cool. So you grew up in St. Louis and access to anywhere in America to pastor, access including, I mean, closer to the South than anywhere, but yet you felt called to pastor in the Pacific Northwest. Now, the South is the Bible Belt. Churches grow big there. Pacific Northwest is much like Canada. It's very liberal. It's a secular society. Churches tend to struggle and grow there, yet you have broken all the odds and had tremendous success. You've grown a mega church despite all the odds against you. So tell us about that. What's worked for you, and how were you able to break through?
Well, I thank you for all of that. I think probably just the whole idea that when I came to the Northwest, I didn't come with all of that awareness of what was going to happen. I, of course, had faith and confidence, but honestly, Pastor Kelly, I was just like really sensing and feeling that I wanted to, I just wanted to make a difference in this part of the country.
Right.
And I guess the challenge of it all did capture my heart. The idea that I always say, I come from a part of the country where a whole lot of heathens live.
Yeah.
and that's really, I always tease when I'm speaking and stuff in the South that, people are born saved, it feels like, in Texas or other parts of the country. But up here, it's definitely a challenge, and it's unique and different. And as far as breakthrough, how we've been able to get where we are, at least, I think it's mainly because we came in here realizing that we didn't know what we were doing. We didn't know how to do it. And we became very open to learning and understanding what might be essential or necessary to being able to communicate and connect with this world up here. And so that openness, along, kind of marrying that up with our own experience, my wife and I growing up in pastor's home, kind of marrying the two of those up, being true to who we were, but being really open about changing our methods of communication and considering how we say what we say. Some of those things were, I think, really helpful to us being able to get the listening ear of people in this part of the country, and received as well as we have.
Well, I know you're very, very intentional about the verbiage that you use in all parts of your service. I've seen that. You spoke a while back in our church, and when it came to the salvation call, and at the end of your message, I really appreciated the verbiage that you used to deliver the gospel, in that you use statements like, "This is your new beginning," and "boldly lift your hands now." So talk to us about the salvation call and the intentionality you use to deliver it.
Yeah, that was formed with just a simple awareness that I'm talking to people who wouldn't really relate to or understand if I just use the normal Christianese sort of phrases. So by asking myself years ago, I started asking myself, how do I describe this in a way that people can understand?
Yeah.
And now I hear what's really rewarding is I hear pastors around the country using some of that verbiage now. But back then it wasn't. I almost felt a little bit, am I betraying, the faith? am I the way I'm saying things not acceptable? But when we started to do it and getting the kinds of responses that I was getting, I just knew we were on the right track.
Yeah.
So we invite people. I just say to people, if you want a new beginning in your life and your relationship with God, that's how I phrase it.
Yeah.
If you want a new beginning in your life and your relationship with God, and then I say what I want to say from there, just in terms of it. It could be a mom and a dad in the room today. It could be a young person. Could be somebody who's been to church before. Maybe you don't relate to what I'm saying. But at the end of the day, if you just want a new beginning in your life and your relationship with God, I'm going to ask you, if you would, to pray this prayer. Pray it out loud. Pray it from your heart. Be bold about it. And then after I pray, and I'll do this, I'll mix it up. I won't do it exactly the same. In this part of it, sometimes I will invite people to pray first, and then after we pray, boldly raise your hand. If you just prayed that prayer, boldly raise your hand. Other times I'll do the opposite. I'll say, raise your hand around the room if you would, and then we're going to pray a prayer together.
Right.
So that part of it can change, but that's basically the format. I always want to end it with a celebration and clap and just applaud what has happened and the decision that you made in this moment, and just how real it is, and let them know that we're going to follow this moment up with some instructions for you and tell you what your next step is.
That's good. I mean, that's very choice verbiage to use. That is key, right? New beginnings. Boldly raise your hand. I mean, that is something that I think is challenging. That everyone could use, easy for all of us to insert into our salvation care. Now, you do the salvation call every single service, regardless of what you preach. Correct?
Correct. Yeah, I even do it. People. This past weekend, I talked a lot about giving because this weekend we're going to have our annual offering that we receive once a year in our church. It's our one biggest offering, of the year, and people are really surprised because on those days I still lean into moments where I invite people to salvation. Yeah. And we see people give their heart to the Lord at those big days. Even a day where I talk about money, talk about giving, talk about things that you would think, would turn people off or turn people away. But we've seen the opposite. We've seen people respond on those days when they're invited and have the opportunity to do so.
Yeah, that's really good. I know one of our biggest salvation calls or response to salvation call ever was on a Sunday that we talked about money, and it surprised me because I thought, man, I don't know if anyone's gonna raise their hand here or give their heart to Jesus here, and then they went all over the room, and I was shocked. I remember thinking, I'm on stage and I'm thinking to myself, I was like, you realize this is going to cost you 10% and you still want in.
This must be the real deal.
It must be the real deal. Yeah. But it's amazing. Regardless of what you teach, I think it's vital. People are looking for the hope that is Jesus, and it's vital to give them an opportunity to receive the gospel. So I love that. So how many salvations or baptisms did Champion Center have in the last year?
I got some numbers here. I knew you were going to ask me that. So in the last 12 months before October, basically, we had 1,184 salvations.
Wow.
And since October, we've actually had another 180. So probably somewhere about 1,400.
So good.
In the last year, salvation decisions. And when we say that, we're not even just talking about hands raised.
Yeah.
We're talking about names and people who actually, so it could be more than that, but we count based on what, a real person that we actually know would fill out a card and say, this is my day, new beginning in my life. So
right, that's somebody that you can follow up with because you've got their information, and because it's about making disciples, not just converts.
Yeah, exactly. And then somewhere between 300, depending on how you count, 300, 350 baptisms.
Wow. That is so good. That's exciting to say. And I know that, many people think, again, Pacific Northwest, this is not, hey, this is not going to work. We're not going to see this kind of thing. But to see those kind of salvations in a year is amazing. And the gospel works. So it's exciting. Now, I'm really excited because you have just written a brand new book that's about to drop. It's called Naked and Unafraid. So tell us about it. What are you excited about?
Well, actually, I have laying on the table in front of me, I've got a copy.
So good.
This is called the, what do they call it? Advanced reader copy,
yeah.
I think. So I don't know, they sent me 40 or 50. My publisher just sent us a few of these, but that's the title of it right there, Naked and Unafraid. And it's 5 keys to abandon smallness, overcome criticism, and be all that you are meant to be.
So good.
So it's a book about vulnerability, and it's a bit of a departure from really my past books. If you have ever, if the viewers today or the listeners today have ever, read any of my stuff, this one's different, and I'm excited about it. I feel like I'm stepping into a space that I wish someone would have helped me with a long time ago by bringing it up. And I think that the whole idea of vulnerability is something that there's a whole lot of conversation and beneficial conversation that we could learn from if we're willing to go there and discuss it and talk about it, that could make our lives better, our relationships better, make us better believers, better Christians, better soul winners, all the way around. So, yeah, I'm excited. Thank you for bringing it up and talking.
Well, if our listeners have not read anything that you've written or haven't heard you teach, I mean, in my humble opinion, and I'm not just saying this in front of you, I'm just saying this for the purpose of our listeners, but you are one of your greatest gifts is your ability to communicate, and you're in my opinion, one of the best communicators that the Big C Church has in the world. So if someone hasn't read what you've written, they need to. I mean, you're amazing at your ability to get across. So I'm really excited about you taking on this topic because I think it needs to be addressed. And I think it's so important in today's society because let's just talk about vulnerability for a moment. What role does vulnerability play, for instance, in a soul winning church? I mean, do you think it's going to help a church more effectively, reach the lost?
Absolutely. I think one of the issues people have in coming to Christ is that they feel like that people who come to Christ put on an image of being perfect or not having any flaws, not having any weaknesses, not having any challenges. And they often feel like boy, those are not honest people. They're not being truthful. Or they feel the opposite. They feel like, boy, I could never measure up to that.
Right.
Like that could never be me. Those people have something I don't have. And so I think it absolutely eliminates barriers that people have towards not only salvation and being a Christ follower, but also acclimating into the community of the church. I just think a lot of people, once you start sharing your stories and once you start sharing some of the real life things and that you face, I literally have people that they don't remember, a lot of what I say, but they remember a story that I tell, and especially if it's my story, especially if it's something I'm sharing. I have a story that I shared. I remember it's been probably 3 or 4 years ago. And I was just talking about discouragement, and I told about myself writing in my journal after 20 years of pastoring one morning when I was really discouraged. And I just kind of told it in real time as far as what it was like that morning for me and when I woke up and the sun was coming up and made my way to my office. And I never journal except for when I'm discouraged. So just told a little bit of that in real time. And people still to this day, for whatever reason, like they'll bring that up. And I tell stories like that about myself quite often, maybe more than ever now. But I just found that when you are honest about your own struggles, your own challenge, your own battles that you go through, and you do it in a way that I want to caution everyone, because in the book I actually talk about the fact that you're not supposed to get naked in front of everybody.
Yeah.
And so I think what I mean by that is I think that there's levels of vulnerability depending on who you're with and the timing and so forth. And so there's layers to every story.
Yeah.
And so a lot of people, when we start talking about this topic, would just be like, wow, and just go for the whole gusto of assuming that we would be as transparent with everyone at the same level, which is not really what we're describing when we talk about vulnerability. But I want to make sure I don't lose my thought here. But I do find that when we are communicating openly with people about real life, real stuff, and sharing what we're going through, what we've been through, and we're doing it in the right way, that it's a real source of encouragement to people.
That's so good. And vulnerability really is a huge key for leaders in order, for us to earn trust and being authentic so that followers will, be willing to follow. And I'm glad you brought this up, but because, how much is too much? And where's the line, and how can we as leaders more easily define that line or find that line? Well,
defining it, how you define it, is actually the key.
Yeah.
How you define vulnerability. So I think that the book and the intention of the book is to give some definition and some clarity around vulnerability as I'm describing it. And it's not only about how open I am in conversation with my stuff, my life, and so forth, but it's also what I call being willing to make a move when there's no guarantee of the outcome. And I think that's the real essential when you back up and you think about making a move. Well, that move can be a move toward you to invite you to church, a move toward you to say, well, you know what, there was a day in my life where I felt exactly like you're feeling right now.
Right.
Or it could be even a move that what I call risk exposure. You got to risk exposure sometimes in terms of the decisions you're making before God as a steward of your own life and your own choices. And so when you take all of the different things that people think when we hear the word vulnerability and put some definition to it, I took a swing at it.
Yeah.
And that was my best one line, is to help everyone kind of come together around the idea that it's making a move when there's no guarantee of the outcome.
That's so good.
You know, whether it's a husband and wife when you're not getting along and you make a move to say, hey, we need to do something.
Yeah.
Can we get help? Can we have a third party? Would you agree to go get counseling with me? I mean, making a move. And those are difficult decisions because of our tendency to protect ourselves, our tendency to feel overexposed, not wanting to put ourselves out there. Sometimes it's just a matter of pride. Other times it could be things like finances or money. But, any time in life that you're at a point where you are fenced in by fear, is what I call it in the book, just getting fenced in by fear, the thing that is most needed in that moment is a step. Vulnerability.
Yeah.
And willingness to put yourself in a place and in a space where all of those things, those fears you have, you are coming against that fear by making a move, even though there's no guarantee of the outcome.
That's so good. Okay, so talk to us about, how to establish a healthy culture of vulnerability in the church, for instance. How do you regularly make sure that there's a healthy culture of openness and honesty and vulnerability without it going too crazy?
Yeah. Well, we definitely have to talk about it. And we have to, it's kind of like with the topic of change in a church. If there's, if you don't talk about change before you're in one, chances are it won't be a good one.
Yeah.
So I look at vulnerability the same way. And that is talking about it. And I would just suggest use other words other than just vulnerability.
Yeah.
Let the word itself, vulnerability, let that be a byproduct of the conversation. One that you just kind of reach in and say the word vulnerability selectively. But I would just say when you're creating this culture in a church, that you want to say things like, hey, let's not be people who play it safe.
Yeah.
Let's not be people who hide behind, the wall or the barrier. Let's not put masks on. I think you can create a lot of verbiage around and create handles around openness and receptivity and words like community. We're a community. We do life together.
Yeah.
I think when people put effort into it, so we'll say, we have a byline that we'll say, we're not just a church to attend, we're a community to belong to.
So good.
That line in and of itself is saying to people, hey, we're not a church to just come and sit and observe and leave. We are a church where we are community that we actually get connected. Another phrase we would use is that it's not about observation, it's about participation.
Yeah.
Anyone can sit in the bleachers, but it takes vulnerability, it takes openness to get in the game.
Yeah.
Put yourself out there. That's what Christ wants us to do. That's what he has done for us. Put yourself out there, move your life forward by making new friends, going to growth track, those kinds of things.
Yeah, that's so good. All right. So sometimes, when a leader is regularly vulnerable and open, he goes too far, sometimes it breeds a culture of familiarity. So familiarity is going to eat away at honor. It's going to eat away at respect, and it can be dangerous to a leader. So how do you guard against, balance between your vulnerability and with guarding it so that familiarity doesn't creep in and erode respect and honor?
Yeah, I think the most important decision is that you're going to find a way to risk exposure. I think that I honestly think that leaders are as criticized for having walls up and protecting themselves as they are for being vulnerable,
right,
or walls down kind of leader.
Right.
I just think that maybe we don't hear it as much if the walls are up. We're not mingling enough to hear that kind of criticism.
Yeah.
But I actually think that there's somewhat of a myth in terms of the familiarity aspect of it. Having said that, go back to what I said earlier when I said, I'm not endorsing getting naked in front of everyone, or naked with everyone. I think just that we're not endorsing or encouraging too much information in the wrong setting,
right, or
too much information with the wrong people,
right.
But when you start being aware of the idea that, I can share a little more than I do, and you start to ease out into spaces of conversation. You start to put it in your messages. You start to laugh at yourself. You start allowing, that part of you. I told a story this past weekend about being on a flight last week, and it was just a simple little story that there was a noise started happening in the area where I was sitting, kind of noise, and nobody knew what it was. 15 minutes went by, a flight attendant came by, heard the noise, started looking. Everybody's looking for this noise. Finally, the flight attendant, and I'm annoyed. I'm in the meantime, I'm getting annoyed at whatever this is and whoever's doing this, and the flight attendant finally opens up the baggage across the aisle for me, the baggage compartment above the seats.
Yep.
And he pops it open and he pulls out my backpack. It was my iPad.
Oh.
And it was making a noise that, I wake up to music in the morning. I don't wake up to
Yeah.
I was flying across time zones and all of that. I still don't know exactly how it happened. But I went on and, I talked about alarms that we have sometimes in ourselves that we don't even recognize them as being false alarms, but they really are.
Yeah.
There's no reason to be alarmed about, for example, about giving. There's no reason to be alarmed when a pastor talks about money.
Yep.
There's no reason to be alarmed about people raising their hands in worship. So when I talk about things like that, what I'm doing is I'm telling a story that makes me look like a klutz.
Yeah.
It kind of just, I'm getting real with people. It was my iPad, and everybody looking at me.
But you left out the part where you point at the person beside you and said, "That must be your bag."
We had a lot of fun with it. Yeah. I think if you're too prideful, my point is you're too worried about, how impressing people. I just think that's a bigger barrier than a lot of leaders realize. And familiarity is probably a concern if you're getting so close to people, one or two individuals. If you're doing that, that's where I would say that principle applies.
Right.
Like if you're having selective 2 friends, 3 friends, and they're your buddies, and you guys kind of have your own inside jokes going on, your own, that gets a little bit goofy and can create a familiarity with those people, those individuals, that's really unhealthy.
Right.
So as a leader, I would just say, make sure that you keep this openness about yourself. You're approachable. You don't have all the answers. You don't know all the answers. You want conversations. You want interaction. And if you're the smartest person in the room, something's wrong. So make sure that you surround yourself with smart people, and then don't be that person who's over in the corner with 2 or 3 people whispering,
right,
and letting them in on your deepest, darkest secrets. Just live an open life. And if you do that, people are going to really appreciate who you are.
That's awesome. It's so good. Thank you so much for writing this book, because I think it's a conversation that it needs to happen, and for leadership, regardless of whether it's in the church or not, but it's something that needs to happen in the church. And I think there's this guarded mentality in a lot of pastors and leaders about being afraid to be vulnerable, and that's restricting our ability to reach. So thank you for taking on this conversation. And I look forward to reading it, and I know our listeners do as well. You mentioned about traveling around. I know you travel a lot and visit churches all over the world. So talk to us about the Big C Church. What are you sensing in this time? Where is God moving, and where should we as pastors really focus right now?
Well, I feel like, Pastor Kelly, I just feel like we're living in a really special time.
Yeah.
And I would encourage those of you who lead churches or on leadership teams to really understand that there's a lot going on that we don't know, and to look enough, like make sure you recently, things that are emerging with stars and people who are, it's been a while now that Kanye West has kind of hit the news.
Yeah.
People are judging, or people have different. But if you look around, you'll see a lot going on that has to do with the bigger picture of people being reached and lives being touched, and Sunday being a special day, and Jesus is King, and however phrase, there's a lot of noise that if we live too isolated, we're going to miss it. So having said that, I would just say that Jesus predicted this, the scripture predicts it, that the kingdom of God comes without observation. And it comes like a little leaven in the yeast. And to assume in our minds, that everybody's going to be converted all at once, or the idea sometimes we have about a revival in our own town, or what that's going to mean in our city, gets in the way of us really seeing and understanding that there is something going on, and there's a mixing that is happening at the root level system of society right now, where Christians are blending in at universities, they're blending in to the media, they are blending into Hollywood, they are blending into politics, they are blending in a lot of different places and spaces, and oftentimes they're not up, on a bandwagon or on the center stage, screaming it out loud. But the sports arena, for example, you just can't hardly get in any of these arenas anymore if you're just observing and not hear the sound of some believers.
Yeah, it's true.
In those spaces and places. And so I would just say for the church, this is our day.
Yeah.
This is our time. And we need to really realize that we are God's plan. And that even when we feel like, well, that person or those stars or whatever, maybe they're not in your church or they're not doing, I think just understanding that they are being drawn into leaders and pastors, and there are people that are pastoring people, even sometimes over online ministries or whatever it might be, their interest is drawing them in to God's great church.
Yep.
And God's great church has these different expressions, but nevertheless, it is God's great church. And I would just say to church leaders that are out there that the more you lean in, the more optimistic you'll become. Like your awareness goes up, and you'll start to realize, wow, I'm a part of something that not only is a lot bigger than I am, but it's growing, and there's a movement taking place, and this is God's plan, and it will always be this way straight on to the very end. Like the church is going to gain ground, it's going to move forward, it's going to make progress. The gates of hell will not prevail against it. So I just sense, I guess, in the church at large, a brand new, fresh awakening of awareness as to who we are, and to realize, hey, we really are stewarding something really special in this season. And I'm just glad to be a part of God's church. I'm so thankful to get to be a part of God's church.
So good. I love that. You can hear your passion in that. It is the church's time. This is going to air on the beginning of January. So what do you see 2020? The church, what are you excited about 2020 for the church? It's our time.
I think that the church is, in 2020, I think we're going to be called more into the lifestyle dynamics of things like, my book, for example, I write about vulnerability and trying to dig deeper into this attitude that we are making shifts that take us out of only weekend mindset or Sunday mindset and take us into an attitude of like-mindedness, so that we are from community to community, city to city, and even nation to nation. We're striking the same note, which is a note of us being God's chosen people, but very much human, and us being the salt and the light of the earth, but very practical, very pragmatic. So I think 2020 is more of us, and I don't want to, I'm just going to say it I'm being vulnerable right now, but I think we're going to blend better in terms of our spiritual life and our practical life.
Wow.
And I think the wisdom that is coming into God's house 2020 and forward is going to be more and more knit together, woven together with marrying up our everyday life with the church and what we do as a church on a mission and the pragmatic dynamics of that. So that actually our cities began to go, these people are real, they're not pretending, they're not making things up. And the effectiveness with which we approach society is yes, it's still the weekend experience. It's still nothing like the corporate gatherings, but it's also got this element in it to where we actually are bringing everyday example and everyday wisdom, not through our perfection, but through our understanding of how God is, in His grace, called us, brought us to where we are, and we are assigned to do something. I like to say it like this. I don't mean to run on and on here, but we're not normal, and we're not meant to be normal.
Yeah.
And just coming to terms with the idea that normal is a setting on a dryer, and it is not who we are as God's people, and being really at ease with that and comfortable in our place and in our space. So
that's so good.
I'm preaching. I don't mean to be preaching.
No, that's awesome. I love it, and man, I see the same thing. I think it's time for the church to be the church, and less about attending a church, and being. We got to get out of the bleachers and onto the field and playing the game throughout the week and not just on Sunday. So I love that. I'm excited about that. Excited about your book as well. And this has been so good. Thank you for doing this. Is there anything that I should have asked but didn't?
I would like to say one more thing about it. Kind of ties everything together. When I was talking about that last part of what we have to look forward to, the book is really about I base the book because I didn't like the word vulnerability. And I was challenged by our team to talk about vulnerability a couple of years ago because what they were sharing with me when it comes to felt needs, people want to be vulnerable but don't know how.
Right.
So when I started trying to, put handles on that and how do I communicate, how do I personally learn this reality, this truth, I came across the Bible story of Saul's daughter, Michal, and David, when David danced in the streets.
Right.
And she sat in the window.
Right.
And that parallel or that picture is really what the book is based on. It's based on the fact that you can either be a window watcher or a street dancer.
Mm.
And when you're a street dancer, you face the potential for criticism from the window watcher.
Yeah.
And so you're not going to always get it right. And you're always going to, find better ways to do things whenever you risk exposure. But at the end of the day, I think David is that model person that I was referring to when I think about the future of us as a church, is because he had the ability to be so open in his worship.
Yeah.
And at the same time, he's a lion killer, giant slayer.
Yeah.
He's like this military leader. So he's like this real raw kind of unapologetic guy who just loved God, fought for the things of God, and yet had this beautiful heart of worship. And there were some people who, hated David, but there was a whole lot of people that loved him because he was able to step into that space of openness and risking exposure and so forth. So, that's the one thing I guess I wanted to try to bring clarity to, is that I do believe that there's a choice being made in this season that we're in between being window watchers and street dancers. And obviously I want to be on the street dancing end of things.
Yeah, that's so good. I love that. All right. So our listeners are dying to know, when is the book available?
Coming out in February. Coming out February 4th is a release date for it. And it's available everywhere.
That is awesome. Cannot wait. February 4th. Excited about that. So where can our listeners connect with you online, get a hold of you, follow what you're doing?
Basically just put my name in, Kevin Gerald. You go to kevingerald.com. You can come to Champion Center, spelled the Canadian way with C-N-T-R-E.
Whoa.
C-E-N-T-R-E. So Champions, S, and then C-E-N-T-R-E, all one word, and you can find just about everything about us.
That's awesome. And I highly recommend everyone do that. Thank you so much, Pastor Kevin, for your time and for sharing with us. We can't wait for your book, and thanks for taking on this conversation. It's exciting and much needed.
Well, thank you. Real privilege, real honor to be with you guys today.
All right. Thank you very much. Bless you. Welcome back. What a great conversation with Pastor Kevin. Man, there's so much content in that conversation. It's worth a listen again. But what stood out to you? What was your big takeaway?
Sure. Yeah. Like right near the end where he was talking about, you can either be a window watcher or you can be a street dancer, and talking about just the theme of vulnerability is that you can either stand on the outside and critique everybody that's willing to be vulnerable, or you could be the vulnerable person and be out there and be exactly who you're supposed to be.
Yeah. I love that analogy. And David really was a very vulnerable leader, a very, very powerful leader, and a great analogy with, him dancing in the street, Michael critiquing him from the window, and that whole idea is so true, because a lot of insecure leaders will critique those who are being vulnerable, and that's not a healthy place to be. But I'd rather be the street dancer. So good, man. These conversations with GoCast are amazing. There's so much content in each conversation that I love. So how do people join the conversation and join what's going on with GoCast?
Sure. Yeah. You can go to iTunes and you can subscribe to GoCast, the podcast, or you can go to the website at gocast.ca.
You can also follow along with us on Facebook or on Instagram and join the conversation. We'd love to hear from you and hear your story as well and hear your input. Man, it's so good. And we would really excited about next week's podcast. We have a great conversation with my friend Pastor Danny Green of Skybreak Church in College Station, Texas, and he's an amazing leader. He's got an awesome church, and the first time I met Pastor Danny, I was really attracted to him and his leadership and what he does. He's got this father heart that comes across very, very powerfully. And here's an excerpt from my conversation with Pastor Danny Green.
We've done probably as many things as anyone else has done, from door hangers to television to mailers to friend days to barbecues after church to radio, television, yard signs. I mean, on and on and on and on. Hands down, the best evangelism tool is a person inviting a friend to church.
Wow, yeah.
Because it is stated time and again, 93% of the people say that if someone they knew invited them to church, they'd probably come.
Wow.
93%. You don't have to build relational capacity. You're not cold calling, like knocking on a door. It's not when they come with a friend, they already have a connection. They don't feel alone. The number one way to grow the church is get the people just to invite their families and friends to come to church.
Can't wait for the next episode with Pastor Danny Green. Thank you again for joining us at GoCast. We'll see you next time.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of GoCast. We hope you feel inspired and better equipped to take your community for Christ. Make sure to subscribe to receive each new episode as it's released. Let's go and break the stat together.